Okay, in this session then we're looking at the psychology of love and what we mean by love, because as we'll see, psychology has kind of attempted to try to define exactly what love is from a psychological perspective. Okay, so who or what do we love then? This may give some clues as to what we mean by love. We love people, okay, we say we love people. We love animals, maybe not in the same way as people. We love food, we might love religion. Okay, so we use the word love in respect of all of these kinds of things. Even when we're talking about people, we say we love, our children, our parents, our whatever, but we don't love those people in the same way as we love perhaps our romantic partners, but we use the term love all the same. In Italian, they say ti amo for loving somebody in a kind of romantic sense, and ti voglio bene for loving a family member. So it just kind of shows that there's different meanings then to love, even though in English we use the term love and love only. And we can illustrate this as well by different metaphors, like we say that we're hungry for love. We're using love in terms of like a sort of food metaphor. We are one is a kind of unity metaphor, I guess. I'm crazy for you, some people say. It's a kind of madness metaphor. And if we look at love in history, even though when we look at romantic movies and we see people being romantically in love, that's not always been the same, or we've not always meant the same thing by being in love as perhaps we do now, for example. The Greeks, going back over 2,000 years, focused mainly on platonic love between generally an older man and a younger man, and kind of sex was basically for procreation, so there was no real evidence then of romantic love in the same way as we talk about that now. In Roman times, a little bit later, love was talked about in terms of a kind of torment, that people might be tormented by love and feel sort of anguish about love. In France, maybe about 200 or 300 years ago, love was generally sort of more unrealistic and perhaps adulterous in some ways. So it was love between people who would not get together, perhaps a degree of unrequited love. But that was what love meant then. And in modern times, we talk about love being synonymous with marriage, that people in long-term relationships who are in love then engage in a degree of commitment to one another and get married. So we talk about love then in terms about love and how that goes together with marriage. And if we look at love and marriage, even over the past 50 years probably, when people are asked if someone had all the qualities you desired, but would you marry them if you were not in love with them? This is the amount of people who said yes. Going to 1967, for men, 70-odd% said yes they would, and 30% of women, which going forward to 1984, we see the amount of people who reported who would say yes has reduced substantially, and you might consider how that might be the case now 36 years on. That might be different again, but you can see that what's meant by love is different and has evolved over the years, even in recent history. One of the things that psychologists have tried to distinguish between is liking and loving. Zach Rubin, for example, talked about liking and loving and developed a scale to try to measure each of those things. So when we say my partner is one of the most likable people I know, my partner is the sort of person I would like to be, I have great confidence in my partner's good judgment, those are all kind of elements of liking. And according to Rubin, on the kind of loving scale, I feel I can confide in my partner about virtually anything. I would forgive my partner for practically anything. I would do almost anything for my partner. So these items are distinguished, in terms of, the first couple being measures of liking and the others being measures of loving. and he obviously was able to distinguish between the two types of items with statistically sort of analysing each of the items into categories. Okay, just to establish some kind of what we call construct validity for Rubin's love and liking scale, Dion and Dion give this scale to 4 different types of people according to their relationships. So it was either casual daters, exclusive daters, engaged couples, or married couples. And quite obviously, and hopefully what Dion and Dion found was that casual daters reported more liking and loving, whereas the other 3 groups, exclusive daters, engaged couples, or married couples, they reported more, or rather similar amounts of liking and loving. So it gives Rubin's scale at least a degree of construct validity that if you apply it to people in those kinds of relationships, then you get those differences. People have also talked about what we call passionate and compassionate love. Passionate love is kind of early stage love. It's a state of high arousal, ecstasy of being loved, agony of being rejected. So it's that kind of, that kind of feeling which we probably can't put into words, which we might feel when we feel we're in love. It's a kind of a passionate state. And later on in relationships, perhaps, people display and develop a more compassionate style of love, which is a more kind of secure or trusting attachment between people. So it's not necessarily sort of characterized by sort of sexual contact or feeling a state of high arousal, but it's more to do with a kind of long-lasting and secure and more trusting attachment between people. There might also be what we call individual differences in the way in which people might experience love. So when people say "I love you," as I hinted at earlier, when we talk about love for different things, even we mean different things, and there might be different feelings perhaps experienced by people in terms of what they experience when they feel that they're in love. So there might be certain people who might experience certain types of love, and we've not got time to outline this here, but if you look at the work of Lee, for example, or Robert Sternberg, then they try to characterize love in terms of different types. Just as a bit of amusement, we'll just look at some love quotes here, because just going on from our individual differences in what is meant by love. So gravitation is not responsible for people falling in love, so says Albert Einstein. If love is blind, why is lingerie so popular? Anonymous. Love is a dirty trick played on us to achieve continuation of the species, says William Somerset Maugham. Come and live in my heart and pay no rent. Okay. I fall in love many times, always with you. Okay, so just a couple of hints there what to put on your Valentine's card. Love might also be related to what is called attachment style, and hopefully you remember what we mean by attachment style. First sort of talked about by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth in terms of the type of attachments we form with our what we call primary caregivers, usually our parents, and especially our mothers, when we're very young. And according to Ainsworth, there are sort of 3 different types of attachment styles. Style A is, I find it relatively easy to get close to others. I'm comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't often worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close. B, I am somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous when anyone gets too close, and often love partners want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. And C, I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I often worry that my partner doesn't really love me or want to stay with me. I want to merge completely with another person, and this desire sometimes scares people away. Okay, so we've got those 3 different styles of love, which, if we look at those, the first one is quite obviously the kind of secure love attachment style, describing relationships as involving happiness and friendship and trust, and everything's great. The avoidance style is people who describe a fear of getting too close, and then we've got the anxious ambivalent style, which is a love life full of emotional extremes, obsessive preoccupations, desire for union with people, but desire for reciprocation as well. Also, more experiences of love at first sight. And these are the percentages of people who report being in each of those styles, and I always think a rather kind of disturbing amount in the anxious, ambivalent, or the avoidant categories. So we've got maybe sort of 45% there, and 56% only who report having a secure attachment style. Obviously, those are to various degrees. So if you're avoidant, you could be just slightly avoidant, or you could be very avoidant. But you'd, according to Hazan and Shaver, be placed in the avoidant category, and they can kind of distinguish between these categories with a kind of an attachment style scale. According to what your score is on the scale, then you'd be placed in one of each of these categories. Okay, there is a critique of this particular attachment style from Bartholomew and Horowitz in 1981, and they said, well, if you give people those paragraphs, which I showed you a couple of slides back, and said, which one are you in? Okay, that's rather a simplistic way to categorize your attachment style. I said it's also been measured with attachment style scales or questionnaires, but even that, giving people sort of a series of statements they need to respond to, and then perhaps categorize them according to that is a little bit simple. We need to do that from a sort of pragmatic point of view sometimes, just to categorize people into styles, but you might think that observation of people's behavior in certain contexts might give us a more realistic view then of what their attachment style is. They also said the avoidant style is rather more complex. So avoidant styles can be because people are avoidant of others because they fear being rejected by them, they fear trusting them and then not being trusted back, and they fear that, so therefore they think it's better off to avoid people, so they're avoidant because of that. Alternatively, people could be avoidant just because they're more autonomous. They don't really want to get into relationships with anybody else, and they're perfectly happy being on their own. So what they're saying, what they're arguing, is that the avoidance style can be divided into two. And Bartholomew indeed came up with a sort of categorization of different attachment styles. So we've got 4 this time, and they're made up of whether you have a positive or negative view of yourself, or whether you have a positive or negative view of other people. So if you're a secure attachment style, for example, you've got a positive view of yourself and you have a positive view of other people, and that's fine. If you have a negative view of yourself and a positive view of others, then you might be sort of anxious, ambivalent, a little bit kind of uneasy towards other people, perhaps. If you have if we have a negative view of yourself and a negative view of others, you might be fearful of rejection. You might be rather suspicious. However, as I said, if you're more sort of autonomous, if you've got a positive view of yourself, but you have maybe a negative view of other people, then you can be self-reliant and you're really not interested in anyone else. As long as you've got that positive view of yourself, negative view of others, you can be a kind of what Bartholomew called a dismissing attachment style. So, we're not just, as psychologists, looking at the psychology of love just for the fun of it, although perhaps we might be, but, there's also, certain sort of usefulness, isn't there, in being able to define love. In the same way, in psychology, we're looking for, the utility of defining any particular variable. And the usefulness of being able to define love means that sort of counsellors or other practitioners perhaps can, if you can sort of operationalise and define what it is, that might help in their work at trying to improve intimate relationships between people. And indeed, intimacy is important. Creating intimacy might advance or sort of cement or consolidate relationships. So intimacy then, what do we mean by intimacy? There are indeed several components of intimacy, although it could be culturally specific, and even within particular cultures, to individuals, what is meant by intimacy might mean something slightly different. But generally agreed, perhaps, that intimacy comprises of what we call affection, personal validation of people, trust between people, and people being able to disclose to each other. So those four are four components of intimacy, which I'll outline now. Well, generally, if we are displaying the first component of intimacy, which is affection, then if there's more affection, then there's more love. Intimacy is, affection can be displayed, can't it? In as much as you might, give your romantic partner, a nice present or a kiss, or say nice things about them, but it's an expression of affection. So affection goes together with intimacy. The more affectionate you are, then maybe the more intimate people actually feel. And the more intimate you are with somebody, then perhaps they feel you're giving them more support. If you say nice things about them, if you give them flowers, presents, or whatever, okay, then that person feels that they're getting greater support from your relationship. Secondly, your second component of intimacy is personal validation. Someone who likes you or loves you even is more likely to approve of you. There's a kind of atmosphere of approval. What you do is approved of, no matter what it might be. There's that kind of unconditional kind of approval. Then people who feel more personal validation might be more likely to disclose. I did a little bit of work on this a couple of years back, talking about personal validation in terms of, for example, online interaction, and the way in which people offer validation by commenting on or liking posts of other people in social media. It is a kind of way of validating what somebody does. If you like what they do, then you're kind of validating them at the same time. Third component of intimacy is trust. Well, obviously, that if you feel that the person to whom you might be disclosing can be trusted, the person you're with can be trusted, and you feel safe with them. If you feel safe with them, then you feel maybe a greater sense of intimacy. And finally, just hinted about disclosure, but as intimacy and connection between people develops, then people disclose more to each other. So as relationships develop, and we know from the literature on self-disclosure that as relationships develop, people tend to match each other, engage in a kind of reciprocal disclosure of information. So when somebody tells you about themselves, then you tell them about yourself, and those kind of disclosures become matched. Okay, there might be gender differences in intimacy as well, which might cause complications. For example, according to Ridley, back in 1993, males talk about intimacy more in terms of physical closeness and sexual behaviour. So that's what intimacy means to males when they interviewed males and asked them what that meant. Okay, those are the general kind of things they came up with. For females, intimacy is to do with love and affection, expression of feelings. So it's not necessarily to do with physical closeness, physical contact, but it's that kind of feeling of affection, feeling of love, and the expression of their feelings in a more kind of verbal sense, or indeed through behaviours. And Sarah Gilligan talked about females describing themselves in terms of the information about other people. So when you ask females about love and their relationship, they generally tend to talk about themselves as being connected with other people, how they are in relation to others. So my partner and I do this, or my partner and I do that, is the way in which females talk about intimacy, which isn't done so much by males, but females certainly, when they're talking about intimacy, they're talking about their relationships, they're talking about their partner and them. So they're talking about a sort of collective thing rather than just what they do or who they are. Okay, so that's it for the first session here then on the psychology of love, and we'll be revisiting this in the next session.